Good morning. Today I'd like to talk about Maya again, the illusion. It's become almost a cliche to say that nothing is real. Maya, illusion, it's illusory. What we look out and see around us, what we experience through all the five senses, isn't real. Well, like many things, it's really easier said than understood, experienced, realized. And I don't think most people really buy into it. I'm looking over at the chair. It sure seems real. And if it's not real, what is it? Yeah, so I've said before, probably one of my favorite modern koans, puzzle without an intellectual answer, is that the only thing that is everything is nothing, and nothing is no thing. It's a puzzle, mental gymnastics, until you exhaust the mind. It just gets overwhelmed and kind of goes into a self-protecting shutdown mode. And maybe this is where your real work can begin. But if someone asked me, if all this is illusory, if this is all not real, what's real? And probably the first answer that would come to me is to say the infinite, the all-encompassing, the perfect expression of self, the culmination of all the selves, and understanding that this culmination of all the selves would be but an infinitesimal part of the whole, of the entirety. And I think this is important when we try to keep it real, that the total insignificance of us on this little planet, spiraling, accompanied by our Milky Way galaxy. But even our Milky Way galaxy, which is beyond our imagination to understand the scope of it, the size, the immensity. But again, this is but a speck in what's out there. The whole, the all-encompassing, but the whole without boundaries. I've often wondered, if the universe is finite, you go to the end, and the best I can do is picture a big bubble. If you go into the end, and you pop through that bubble. Put your head through the bubble. What's there? And when they talk about multiverses, I find that really interesting. All these different bubbles floating around. And wormholes, connections between the two bubbles. Connection between distances. Instantaneous traveling. Which, at some level, all of us know to be so. So this is my first thought of what's real. It's grand. Bordering on grandiose. It's too big to wrap your mind around. But is there anything that we could begin to scale down enough that it's in the realm of possibilities? It's possible for us to entertain, to speculate. And that seems to be the space between. When I say space between, many things come to mind. The space between words. The space between inhaling and exhaling. The space between heartbeats. The space between words. The space, if you think about it, the space between words makes what's come before and what follows understandable. There is no space between our written words or our spoken words. It would be pretty much gibberish, wouldn't it? The mind would have to look for, the mind would adapt and create the spaces, because without those spaces, it's incomprehensible. So that led me to really see the significance of the space between. I'm fascinated by our minds, how it works. And honestly, other than a really superficial understanding, the body of knowledge that we have about the mind, well, like everything else, leaving a lot to be desired. There's so much that we don't know. But what we do know is fascinating. Neurons. I understand tens of billions of neurons. And in simplicity, a neuron is a nerve cell. But the communication, how is this at lightning speeds transferred against the gaps between the space between our neurons? Well, I started reading a little bit about synapses. And synapses is, as near as I can understand it, to my understanding, is about the space between the neurons. That's responsible for transporting this information. And it happens so many times and so often that it's really beyond most of our scope of understanding. If you look at heartbeat or breaths or words, the space between is easier to grasp. But in your mind, these neurons, synapses, neuron, synapses, neuron, the space between, and how it's bridged, how quickly it's bridged, and how necessary that bridge is to the continuation of cognitive ability. Just as the space between your heartbeats, the space between your words, the space between your breaths, is an essential part of the process. And if you look at it for a minute, that space is what we call empty on a molecular or on the level of the atom. The space between becomes more obvious. When we see something that looks solid, it's at least, if not more, than 90% empty space. When we look at the stars, we say, oh, the space between the stars, the space between the planets is empty. And now astronomers are increasingly finding that it's indeed anything but empty. They start talking about dark energy, dark matter. What we see is only a minuscule, a portion of the total mass that they've been able to estimate the universe as containing. And they scramble and rush to understand what this, in a way, for my purposes today, space between contains a significant percentage of what the universe is. Even if you think about it, our process of learning and understanding, there's space between your space and time, between what we understand in this moment and what we'll eventually understand in the future. Space. The space between steps when we're walking. So I might suggest that you might entertain the idea, as I have, that this space between one moment and the next moment is highly significant. And it might be, I like to be a little stronger than might. Let's elevate might to probably. And if you're talking about just consideration, let's take that up a notch and say, it has some certainty that reflection, contemplation on the space between could be an easier way instead of a cosmic, overwhelming, most cosmic conception of the universe and what it means. Well, that's fun. I love entertaining the big picture. And in most cases, That's where I am. I'm a big picture kind of guy. I'm not really detail oriented. But the microcosm, at least in relating to the space between my fingers, defines my hand. So I will bring my head out of the clouds to come down and look at the rather mundane things that we just take for granted. We don't really consider. So when someone is asking me, what's real? If everything's not real, and that's beyond our understanding, intellectually, we can never grasp it. This is inspirational, as is almost, at least for me, almost anything of significance that's occurred for me, that's happened for me on my journey of spiritual inquiry. I'm suggesting that we look closer to home while, of course, while releasing the mind to the realms of the infinite. It's good sometimes, or it might be helpful. It has been to me, and I'm suggesting that it might be for you, to come back to the microcosm, to come back to a level that might be just so mundane until you look at it with fresh eyes. And I believe that the exercise of doing this, we need to learn to look at everything with new eyes. And also new ears, new smell, new taste. Expand the horizons of ordinariness. Because as you that have listened to me before know that the incredible magic ordinariness has for me. So let's look at something with fresh eyes. Let's listen with fresh ears. Let's smell those beautiful smells with a new nose. Let's taste. It's the expansion of what we do have. The five senses we do have. And sometimes in our macro exploration, we tend to think that these are the things that we're to eventually escape from. And as I get deeper and deeper into my own studies and reflections, I learned that, I begin to understand that what we have is of great significance. It's a blessing. It's almost like it was intentionally done by the divine will. Because these are the tools that we can use to explore, to rediscover what we've always known, to become what we've always been. So just things that we take for granted, such as today I'm talking about the space between. In music, the space between notes. I've heard more than one musician say that the space between the notes is maybe the heart of music. Some of them will focus on that space between. That space between which to the uneducated ear is empty. So that many, many, many people have explored and appreciated the concept of emptiness, the space between, and how full emptiness really is. Without it in our lives, well, I think it would be sensory overload without the spaces, without the pauses. When would you have a chance to collect yourself, much less reflect, if we were just bombarded by constant, linear linear events? Would a telephone ring? Would it be a ring without the space, the time between rings? It would just be continual, a nightmare. Becomes like a siren, but even a siren winds down, although never completely quiet, because the concept of a siren is to alert, alarm, wake us up, pay attention. But even a siren winds down. You watch it in children, no matter how active, what a dynamo these little people are. You can watch them wind down and just crash, as any parent has seen. But really, the purpose of today's talk is to find significance in what we had previously, maybe we had considered insignificant. The space between defines what comes before and after. So it's anything but empty. And upon reflection, you begin to start to understand that perhaps the space between is more significant than the event preceding or the antecedent. Even when we're talking about, it's just become so many cliches, spiritual cliches, and being in the moment, mindfulness, so a lot of those things come to mind. But rather than I decry and say, oh, it's become a cliche, and a cliche for most of us means that it's been talked about enough that it's not useful any longer, it's not meaningful any longer. And I feel quite the opposite. I think when something becomes a cliche, especially in this spiritual realm, I think this is incredible. I welcome this because it means it's permeating the overall consciousness. And I see that this will be part of our lives to exponential, almost geometric progression as the time comes that more and more people wake up. And this is all part of the designs. If you go back and look in the Buddhist cosmology, they would talk about the Mayan calendar. And many, many indigenous ancient peoples could see the secular notion, the secular being of the universe. And it progresses past the one that we obviously see, days to night, birth to death of humans on a small scale, but it's on a cosmological scale. We're going back to the macro again. It's really interesting when you focus, when I'm talking about, when you pay attention to the microcosmic, it's almost like you go through and emerge into the macro. It's like a wormhole, Alice in Wonderland, the rabbit hole. So if you get overwhelmed by the bigness of it all, come back down to a level that you can relate to. And you will find, as I have found, that it's a keyhole. It's a keyhole. You can peek through the keyhole of smaller, of the micro cosmology. You can peek through. You can go through. You can pass the portal to the macro, the grand cosmology. So next time that you're paused, next time that you're practicing your mindfulness, being in the moment, you can even define, isn't there a space between moment to moment? Time and space. Space-time, as Albert Einstein, inextricably linked. You can't talk about time without remembering space. But even in the moment, isn't there a pre-moment and a post-moment? Isn't there like our neurons and the synapses that communicates? And think of the continuity. What provides the continuity from moment to moment? It would be just stopgap, little mini moments. Many moments. Without pre and post. Pre and post is space. Post-doctorate, look at the word preordained. Post-doctorate, it is a measurement of emptiness, a measurement of time between postdoctorate, between completion of your doctorate and continuing studies. And I love the idea of postdoctorate. It makes education, there's really no end. And it doesn't culminate with a PhD. It allows it allows space to continue this process of lifelong education. So if you think of the word pre and post, before and after, both of them are the spaces between. And they just might, at worst, be equal in importance to the event. And I'm beginning to understand that they just might be more important, more critical, because without the space, without that, the event would be, maybe might not even be able to occur. If you didn't have a space between breathing in or out, if there wasn't a space between heartbeats, just imagine for a moment, how would there be time if there's no no time between in and out for the breathing? How would there be time to separate them? And just breathing in wouldn't be of much use, would it? Just breathing out would be equally of no use. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by trying to grasp the significance of the cosmos, the macrocosmos, in your pursuit of understanding, in your pursuit of your spiritual inquiry, pause for a moment. Come back down to the level of mundane. Just as I embrace the significance of ordinariness, I'm slowly understanding the significance of the mundane. And by mundane, I mean the things we take for granted. Part of the unwinding, part of the journey is to re-examine, to look again at everything that you take for granted. Learn to look at what you do take for granted, because it's becoming very obvious to me that it's within the ordinary, it's within the mundane, it's within the fresh eyes and the fresh mind and the freshness of examining everything that you take for granted. Take the space, create the space between understanding, a process of understanding, and more significant levels of understanding. Take the time to examine that space between.